I've been arguing this. I co-write two things. I'm co-writing a police drama series at the moment, and with a Scandinavian writer. So a lot of comparison being made with Scandinavian drama. So almost everything we do, you both have to build on the successes of what's gone already, but also make sure you're different. So you are always looking for originality, but if you're working within genre, the audience want to know certain rules, but then you need to break them. And then there are so many films and books and everything else, so to be truly original is really difficult. To have an original cocktail of ideas and of styles is not so difficult or, unrealistic in ambition. So it seems to me that occasionally you have something that completely breaks the mould. Maybe like Star Wars the first time it came out. I mean, there had been science fiction, there had been westerns, but the idea of this kind of crossing, basically putting a kind of western story like Rio Bravo, but into an outer space, just when all the technology was coming to the fore, just seems to be kind of genius really. So so I don't know. I think there are definitely sparks and kind of waves of completely new ideas and new ways of telling stories that mean that you can be original and not just write for somebody else's series or copy something. But finding something that no one can ever poke fun at or can ever kind of say that's a bit like something else, I think is very difficult to do. I think there's pressure on from different places. There's pressure on yourself because it's really boring to write something that you know is just a copy of something else. So even if you're doing an adaptation, you try and find your own way of telling that adaptation. So there's pressure on you. What's the point of spending like 5 hours writing a complete copy of something that's told in TV the week before? There's definitely pressure from an audience because they will soon sniff out. They're really kind of quite educated these days, and they'll sniff out a story that they've just watched, so they won't pay for it, and then the main pressure comes from producers who don't quite know what they want, executives or commissioners. They're basically looking for something that looks like something that's gone before they know is a success, but something that's going to be different and make a name for themselves. So you see, like an awards ceremonies, there's lots of stuff that is original, and people want that spark of originality, but they won't get into the kind of the big populist area unless they deliver something that people recognise. So if you mix too many genres and people don't understand it, and they can't sell it in a cinema or to a TV company, then it's really difficult. So finding that balance of something that's an original idea told in a really sparky way, but that people will feel comfortable with, is the kind of challenge, I think. But yeah, I think there's always a real desire to do something that is just is unusual for an audience, but is also puts some of you in that story. So how can anybody really know what's inside you until you tell them in a really original way? So I guess that's the challenge, is thinking, I think I'm the only one that's experienced this in this particular way, but a lot of other people will get it, in terms of a very personal story that you kind of adapt to tell in a different way. If you're writing commercially, then you can come up with original ideas in your own bedroom or in your office most of the time, but then you have to find a way of selling it to someone else. So either you go to a producer with 4 or 5 ideas, reasonably well fleshed out, that you've just developed by yourself from a whole range of stuff, or more likely you go to somebody who says, and I've just been dealing with Hat Trick recently, or Company Pictures, or you go and they say, we think there's a niche in the market for this particular, historic drama, it's contemporary cop show. At the moment, they're all looking for something on television that's not cops and it's not police, it's not hospitals, but it is something that can come back in a kind of episodic way. And in film, they're always looking for, they're always looking for lots of different genres, but say the new rom-com, but it can't just be another 4 Weddings or another, Love Actually or something. Yeah. So they want an element of that, something else. But in terms of the way that I come up with a whole range of different things, sometimes it's just the spark. I was working on at the moment, and we were just thinking about what it would be like to be able to recognise love in other people, to be a kind of proper matchmaker. So the idea originally was a rom-com, so you get somebody who's useless at their own love life, but they can see people, either a couple just about to get married and she's the one that goes, don't do it, and everyone else thinks they're perfect and she's the one that can't do it. But her own love life, and she can't recognise when someone loves knocking on the door. So we thought that could be quite interesting as a sitcom, and then it got much more dark, kind of got darker and darker as we developed it, thinking, well, what if somebody had that ability to tell the truth? What is it? You know, if it's just love every week, then it's a bit repetitive. Although there is a programme at the moment called The Wedding Band, I think, or something like that. That's, you know, it seems to repeat that whole idea. But so then we started to go about what it is if you can recognise the truth in other people, and you then can't stop yourself telling it. So that kind of went, you know, so I guess that's how it develops. You start of it as a kind of half-hour sitcom with a clever idea, and then the more you flesh it out, the more you think, actually, this could be really interesting. And then then you start thinking, well, what does that person do? What is it that drives them? What's their experiences? And so we created a character that this woman, as it happened, was a war photographer. And then you try and find a theme and a way, why is it that it links together? So for example, she, as a war photographer, is trying to tell the truth. So she's taking photographs of the truth, trying not to get emotionally involved, and she thinks that's going to make a difference. And then what we're trying to say is that when she comes home, she realises that they were nothing but kind of wallpaper, really, that no one's really opinions changed by them. So that what she determines is she has to tell people the truth. And again, it's not, you know, there is films like a comedy film, is it Liar Liar, by,
Yep.
you know, that about a kind of something happened to this guy and he can't stop telling the truth. So it's not completely original, but it's not a comedy like that. It's kind of become much more dark. But it's just interesting. You work with a producer, and I'm also working with another writer, and you start off with a spark of an idea and it turns into something else. And so she, you know, at the moment she's a war photographer, but quite easily you could transfer it to another country or. So yeah, they come from all over the place, and the cop show I'm writing is because we thought, you know, they're always popular, and the woman I'm writing with is Danish, and we knew that The Killing had done really well in terms of British TV. So we thought if we could capture some of that, but for a British audience. So there, it's not totally original, but obviously you're saying, if we're going to do a copy, we can't just do Sarah London, her jumper, doing The Killing 5. You have to find a kind of unique way of telling it. So location, character, theme, and sort of and story. Yeah, I think you know, you are a genius if you can just sit with no influence from anybody else and come up with a story. I think it might be slightly easier in terms of novel writing, because you can create a whole world and backstory and inner thoughts within a novel. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying maybe it's easier as a kind of solitary. But what you have to realise about filmmaking is that it's collaborative, so that someone's going to have to film it, act in it, fund it, screen it and everything else. And the way the business works is if it's going to be something that is commercial, you're going to have to listen to producers, exec producers, script editors, director, you know, and then probably actors as well, who'll have their own opinion on something. So a good friend of mine wrote, Billy Ivory wrote Made in Dagenham, which was a kind of, well, it was a period rom-com political drama, if you like, a real kind of mishmash. And it was, the producers came to him with the idea that the Dagenham strike in '68 that changed kind of women's rights was a really interesting time and a place. So they suggested that as an idea, and then he met the women that had been involved in it, read up about the story, and then had to create a character at the centre of it that didn't really exist, but was an amalgamation of different people. And then it became her story. So it was her story as a member of that group of women who was on strike, and how it changed her and her relationship with her husband and her children and everything else. So they had real political characters in it. They had a real strike at a real time, which he did lots of research for, but he invented this woman at the centre of it that was like 5 or 6 other people. A bit more glamorous, a bit more, you know, probably a bit braver than some of them, probably not as brave as others. And then you have to think of how, you know, what is it the story that you tell and all the ancillary characters. So it was a really good example of someone coming to him with an idea, and then within that structure him having to find a character that he really believed in, and that was, you know, was basically a kind of drama but with a kind of comedy elements thrown in. So I think that's often how the business works. They'll give you an idea, but there'll be lots of other people suggesting things to you, and, you know, both good things and bad things, you know, about how you should tell it. And then you look at the kind of rules as they are, and you'll see that, you know, people expect to be in the cinema between, You know, if they're only there for an hour, they'll think they've been shortchanged for their money, and if they're there for 5 hours, they'll think this is a bit indulgent. TV show The Wire, I guess, just really comes to mind at the moment, just because it does break some of those rules in terms of the number of characters, in terms of being on the goody side and the baddie side. You're not quite sure who's, you know, who's what to start with. Difficult dialogue, complicated stories that go on for, you know, months, and everyone's kind of corrupt as well as, you know, got a kind of good side to it. So I just thought it was a fantastic watch, really, and just kind of just sucked me in every time. So they played the same rules. You needed a cliffhanger at the end of every episode. So if you watch the box set, you'd kind of get to the end of, you know, one of the episodes, and they'd play that thing which you just have to play, which is, you know, big, you know, is he dead or isn't he dead, and somebody's going to, you know. So they played by those rules, but some of the other stuff in the middle of it, in terms of allowing you to develop character and where you went with them and everything else, was fantastic. So yeah, The Wire. Films, I don't know, I saw The Guard last year, fantastic Irish kind of buddy comedy, but really dark, so much swearing, kind of really corrupt fat policeman who had lots of prostitutes and did drugs, and it was just like, it should have been so wrong, and yet it was just fantastic. Great script, really interesting setting, brought in an American drugs cop from LA and played on the kind of idea that he was black, but he was, you know, he was the smart kind of outside, you know, smart kind of outsider, intelligent guy who was faced with all these kind of Irish cops and stuff. It was just great. I just really loved it. So, you know, not even a particularly big budget, but clever script, great actor at the middle of it, and just a little story that suddenly exploded into life and stuff. It's great. You'd like to think as a creative, you know, writer, that it had a limited time span, because you just think you're basically told what to write by producers who decided what people want to see, you know, in prequels and sequels and, you know, spin-off series and everything else. So I'm not saying that there's somebody who's written for serials, you know, Paul Abbott invented Shameless, and basically I just came in with an idea of something that happened to my brother once that would make a good episode. So I've got nothing wrong with writing within the confines of a series, but the idea that that's all you're ever doing is constantly looking at feeding a kind of ongoing thing. You think it's got to be a law of diminishing returns. You've used up your best stories, and that's what happens with most good, you know. They say that a lot of those kind of shows, you know, if they can kill them off after just a few series, everybody ends up thinking they were fantastic, you know. But if you do Police Academy's 12, you know, you're thinking, you know, it might have been vaguely funny at the first, you know, at the beginning, but, and I suppose that, you know, things like Carry On films kept on going for a while, but even they kind of really fizzled out. And so yeah, I would say I'd like to hope so, but on the other hand, you see some of the viewing figures and you just do think the way that people go to the cinema, that some of the time there will be those big popcorn films which just will sell out no matter what. But it's difficult to judge, isn't it? Because you look at some of the Superman ones, you think, oh, Superman, it's going to be a hit. You know, maybe the new one will be, but some of the other ones have been a bit kind of damp squib. If it's Superman 3 or whatever, it's kind of yeah, but I've got a bit bored with it, really. And it's sort of, something like the Batman, you just think, how many times can you know that he's going to survive for a sequel, but go through the kind of darkness of, you know, losing his powers, or, you know, being shamed and thrown out of town and coming back in again, you know. So it's like with a Western, I think you can retell the kind of idea of a stranger coming to town and the kind of the frontier versus the kind of civilization, tell it in loads of different ways, but just to have the same character relive that journey as as a character has to do, you know, do they never learn a lesson from it if they keep on repeating? So I'd like to think it was, but I'm not sure it is really.